Well, good evening, everyone. We want to welcome you as you're logging in. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are excited and delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Allison Master, who's going to be talking to you about breaking the stereotypes, how to support STEM learning and motivation. We are based here in Silicon Valley, which I think many of us attending tonight are as well. But this topic is, of course, universal and international. So we couldn't be more delighted to have Dr. Master with us. And her area of expertise is gender and STEM studies. So we're going to be hearing a lot of really interesting things tonight, whether you have a girl or a boy.
So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I'm also a parent, so I love that the Parent Venture is organizing these sessions for parents like us. Although Charlene just gave me a wonderful introduction, I wanted to start also by giving you a little bit of information about my background. Um, um, so I grew up in the mountains in Asheville, North Carolina, where my mom was a preschool teacher. And I loved volunteering in her classroom as much as I could, and then really planted the seeds of my interest in child development. And growing up, I was always very good at math and loved math. And in middle school, I started doing math competitions. And I was usually the only girl on my team, the only girl who scored really well. And then people would make comments about my gender all the time. So my gender was always part of these conversations. And it drove me crazy because I wanted to be recognized for me as an individual, not as a member of my gender. And so fast forward 10 years, I got my PhD in developmental psychology at Stanford University with Dr. Carol Dweck, who's famous for her research on mindsets, growth mindsets, and their consequences for students' motivation and achievement. So this is Carol with her husband David in the photo booth at my wedding. And so working with Carol, I became really fascinated by the power of our beliefs to shape our outcomes. So when I was working with Carol Dweck, I was really impressed by how powerful our beliefs could be in shaping our emotions. So whether you believe you can succeed or you believe you can't succeed, you're probably going to be right. But the really cool thing about our beliefs, the thing that makes them even more meaningful and important, is the fact that they're malleable. We can change our beliefs. And so when we as parents or teachers work to shape children's beliefs, we can help to change their outcomes. And so what that means to me as a psychologist is that we can use that knowledge to help our kids and give them the best possible chances for success. So after that, I went to the University of Washington to do a postdoctoral fellowship. And one of the advisors that I worked with was Dr. Sapna Cherian, and she was a social psychologist who did an internship at Adobe, as in, Adobe Acrobat, the tech company. And while she was there, she was really struck by all the ways that the tech industry and computer science as a field were making women feel like they didn't belong there. So the more that I learned from her about the gender disparities in STEM fields like computer science, the more determined I was to use my knowledge about motivation and the power of beliefs to motivate kids in STEM fields like computer science. And because I have this background in child development, I'm convinced that childhood and adolescence are really key times to set kids onto the positive academic trajectories that are going to lead to their later choices and outcomes in college and in life. And so all of these come together for me because if we want to support STEM learning, we need to reach children at early ages to understand how their interest in STEM develops. All right, so we're going to start by talking about why we should care about STEM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And STEM is important for everyone in our society. So think about the smartphone in your pocket, the apps that you use every day, the car that you drive, and even the road that you drove down, and the last doctor's appointment that you went to. All of these involve STEM. So you might think, I'm not in a STEM career, or my kid's probably not going into a STEM career. Why does this matter for me or for my kid? But STEM fields teach kids how to think systematically, how to think, how to solve problems step by step, how to come up with creative solutions. And these are skills that everyone needs. And we all know that our world is becoming increasingly tech dependent, and our kids are growing up far more tech savvy than we did. But at the same time, not all children see a future for themselves in STEM. So we're going to talk today about why some children, especially girls, are less interested and less likely to participate in STEM, and what parents can do to encourage all kids in STEM. So Why are girls less interested in STEM? And some people argue that there are just innate biological differences between girls and boys, that boys are just more interested in things while girls are more interested in people. And that could maybe be one small part of the answer. But even before babies are born, we start treating them differently, even down to the clothes that we put them in. So who gets to wear the onesie that has robots and construction equipment, and who wears the onesie with the hearts and the statements about being pretty? And these differences in experiences that we give to girls and boys add up quickly and push them in different directions. So this pattern continues in the way that we talk to our kids. Parents give boys more explanations about STEM subjects. We just encourage boys more in STEM. All right, I'm going to be talking a lot about stereotypes tonight. And so, what I mean by stereotypes are beliefs that link groups with certain traits or characteristics, like the belief that men are better than women at math and science. And our own stereotypes as parents affect how much we push girls towards reading and writing and language arts, and how much we push boys towards math and science. And sometimes we're reacting to what we see in our children and the interests that they already have. But there are many times when we could do a better job of encouraging them to explore new interests and discover new things that they might love. And this pattern continues in the toys that we buy children and the opportunities we give them as parents. Toy stores used to be really, really bad about having separate aisles that they labeled boys' toys and girls' toys. And all the robots and science kits were in the boys' aisle, and all the tea sets and the craft kits were in the girls' aisle. I heard a quote from a 9-year-old boy who said something like, they have aisles for boys and girls so the boys don't get the wrong things. And so children really internalized these labels. And stores have gotten better about this in recent years to not explicitly label the aisles differently, but the way they organize toys still sends huge messages to kids about what they're supposed to be interested in. And then our choices as adults can reinforce this. So, for example, as an example that's very relevant to parents, when you're going to buy a toy for a kid's birthday party, especially a kid that you don't know that well, how often do you make a toy choice that matches gender stereotypes compared to one that counters the gender stereotypes? And honestly, as a birthday present buyer, I have not always done the best job of resisting the gender stereotypes myself. But one time, one of my research collaborators decided to try to break this pattern, and she gave an electronics kit to a friend's 7-year-old daughter. It was a snap circuit kit, so kids could make like doorbells and radios and alarms with these little circuit pieces that snap together. And it became one of the girl's favorite toys. And she liked it so much that she actually asked her parents if she could go to robotics camp. And that story inspired me to go buy one for my own daughter. And she had a lot of fun with it. So I think we have to realize that our kids will often surprise us. I have both a daughter and a son. They're 12 and 10 right now. And I think it was a huge benefit for both of them that we always had all the types of toys in our house, because lots of times they would play with the gender stereotypical toys, but many, many times they would surprise me with what they wanted to play with. So these opportunities that we provide matter a lot. And starting from a very young age, children pay a lot of attention to these cues. Kids have even been described as gender detectives. They're constantly searching for cues and information about gender. And kids' preferences and interests are really strongly influenced by what they think is for their gender and what their gender likes to do. So if girls think that computers or robots or electronics are not for them, then they're not likely to develop an interest in these things. And kids see these gender stereotypes everywhere. So, in terms of things like coding and computer science, basically, from the time that companies started selling personal computers, they were marketing them to boys because boys liked computer games and companies wanted to sell computers. And at the same time, girls saw Barbie talking about how math class is tough. And we might think that we made a lot of progress, but not that long ago, Mattel made a book about Barbie learning to be a computer engineer. But in the book, she still needed help from the boys to do the actual coding. So these stereotypes are everywhere, and they get inside our minds and they get inside our kids' minds. And as parents, we send these stereotypical messages too. When we say things like, oh, she's such a girly girl, she wouldn't want to play with that. Or we tell our daughter that she should sign up for art as an elective instead of coding. And if we have math anxiety ourselves, we can pass it along to our daughters in the way that we talk about math, especially for moms. And, we also limit the opportunities that we give to our sons to play in ways that support their social and emotional development by steering them away from dolls. And we encourage them to do the STEM summer camps, and we let them learn science in big, messy, chaotic, fun ways. And these stereotypes are a problem because they create barriers. So it's like a door that closes girls out of the STEM room. It's like a sign that basically says no girls allowed. And then these stereotypes create self-fulfilling prophecies. So if we let girls believe that girls don't like STEM, then they start to think that they shouldn't like STEM either, and then they avoid STEM activities. And then this just reinforces the idea that girls don't like STEM because they never get the chance, the opportunity to discover how much they actually do like it. And then nothing happens to break this cycle. So believing that girls don't like STEM contributes to other girls not liking STEM either. And then this cycle continues over and over. So as adults, we just need to help open that door for them. They might not all choose to walk through the door, but we want them to feel like they have that choice. We want all kids to feel like that door and that path are open to them. So this is Chimamanda Adichie. She's a Nigerian author and novelist, and she gave a wonderful TED Talk a few years ago about stereotypes. I highly recommend it. And I want to share with you her take on stereotypes. So she talked about the danger that happens when our society only tells one story about something. She said the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete and they make one story become the only story. So let's think about what happens when the only story that young girls hear is that STEM is not for them. So in my research, we focused on gender stereotypes in particular and how this belief that STEM is for boys can make young girls feel like they won't belong in STEM. And when girls feel like they won't belong or can't succeed in STEM, they're not interested in trying it and they choose to take other classes or do other after school programs. And we can also see the influence of stereotypes when we look at the wide variation between different STEM fields in terms of the adults who go into them. So this graph shows you the percent of bachelor's degrees in the United States that were earned by women starting around 1968 and continuing through 2018. The dotted black line shows all bachelor's degrees. So you can see in recent years, women are earning around 58% of bachelor's degrees. They're actually more likely to be graduating from college than men are. And you can also see that some STEM fields have shown big increases in representation over time. So for example, if you look at the green line for biology, this is a very common major for students who are pre-med. Biology increased from about 30% women to more than 60% women. And even math and statistics in that gray line were up to about 41%, which is pretty close to being gender balanced. If you're sitting in that room, it feels pretty gender balanced. But computer science and engineering look very different. So here, computer science is in red and engineering is in orange. And you can see that these fields remain very unbalanced in recent years, with only about 20% of bachelor's degrees going to women in these fields. And these are also the fields that have the strongest gender stereotypes. You might also notice something kind of interesting about computer science. That computer science seemed to be headed on a track towards equity in the 1970s, along with biology and chemistry. But then something happened kind of in the mid 1980s that made those numbers start decreasing down to about 20%, where they are today. So what changed around 1984? So way back when, in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, computer programming was viewed as something that needed careful and elegant attention to detail. And that was something that women were supposed to be good at. And writing code was less interesting for men who were more interested in making the hardware behind computers. But then things started to change in our society in the mid 1980s when personal computers started becoming more common. And one big change was the stereotypes in the media and movies. In movies like Revenge of the Nerds and Weird Science, the computer nerds were nearly always young white men. And then personal computers and the video games, which got kids interested in computers, they started to be marketed far more often to boys. And all of these started to feed into the development of stereotypes in our society of computer scientists as these geeky, nerdy, white, or Asian guys. And these stereotypes, they are pretty intersectional now. So they involve both gender and race and ethnicity. And I'm going to talk mostly about gender today, but I just want us to think about all the different and complex ways that these stories shape the possibilities that children see for themselves in these worlds. And so the reason that these stereotypes matter is because they have these meaningful consequences for students' STEM education. We know women are less likely to major in these STEM fields, less likely to enter these careers. Black and Latina women are especially underrepresented in these fields. And then these gender gaps can be traced back to children's motivation. So girls report lower interest and competence in STEM fields as early as elementary school. So these gender gaps in STEM, these are very complex problems with multiple causes and approaches for addressing them. But today I want to share with you my research on stereotypes and how they create these barriers for girls. And we're going to focus especially on computer science and engineering because these are the fields where the barriers are the largest. And so the stereotypes matter because they create these self-fulfilling prophecies that push girls away. And we've done a lot of experimental studies where we look at whether stereotypes can cause girls to become less interested in activities like computer coding. And the answer is yes. So every single time, every single study, we find that girls are much less interested in STEM activities when we remind them about these stereotypes. So in one of our studies, we told 8 and 9-year-old girls about 2 computer science activities that they could try, the reducing activity and the searching activity. And so we randomly assigned one activity a stereotype. So we told kids girls are much less interested than boys in this one. And for the other activity, it wasn't stereotype. We told them girls and boys are equally interested in this activity. And the girls in our study, they themselves were much less interested when the activity was stereotyped. So I want to show you an example of how most of the girls in our study responded. And so we found that 65% of the girls in our study chose to avoid the stereotyped activity and do the other non-stereotyped activity. And then we ran another really similar study with middle school girls in 8th grade, and we gave them the same kind of in stereotyped or non-stereotyped information about computer science classes that they could take. And we found that the older girls showed exactly the same pattern. So middle school girls were also much less interested in taking a computer science class when it was linked to the stereotype that girls are less interested than boys in computer science. And so we found that time 80% of girls preferred to take the other non-stereotyped class. And in both of these studies, the stereotype didn't matter at all for boys, just for the girls. And we learned more about why girls were less interested. Because when they heard about these stereotypes, it made them feel like they wouldn't belong and wouldn't be good at this activity or in this class. And the more that they felt that way, the less interested they were. So this graph is going to show you some of our data from a study with more than 1,500 kids that shows you how much kids already believe in these stereotypes, that boys are more interested than girls in STEM. So computer science is going to be the line that shows up in black, and then engineering is going to be the line that shows up in green. And I've broken it down by grade level, going across the bottom of the graph from kids in 1st grade all the way through 12th grade. And so positive values on this graph represent stereotypes that favor boys, meaning beliefs that boys are more interested. So that's going to be anything you see in that blue area on the graph. And then negative values represent stereotypes that favor girls, beliefs that girls are more interested in STEM. And that's going to be anything down at the bottom in that purple zone. So what I want to show you is that by 3rd grade, kids already believe that boys are more interested than girls in computer science. And this belief just gets stronger and stronger as they get older, especially once kids get to middle school, which is where, and high school, which is where they actually have more opportunities to even try computer science. And our data for engineering was even more striking. So kids already believed these gender stereotypes about engineering by 1st grade. The earliest we started asking them, they already believed that engineering was for boys. So young kids in elementary school, they already believe that computer science and engineering are activities for boys. And something else I want to show you is that, we sometimes talk about STEM like it's one big thing, but really different STEM fields are very different from each other. And even elementary school children have different stereotypes about different STEM fields. So like I just showed you on the previous slide, in engineering, children have very strong stereotypes favoring boys as early as first grade. And again, for computer science, it's just a little later by third grade. But when we ask them about science, kids don't really have gender stereotypes about science yet. And for math, many kids don't have gender stereotypes about math, or they even maybe think that math is for girls. So when we think about children in STEM, we do need to pay special attention to computer science and engineering because these are activities that kids typically don't get much experience with, except for figuring out pretty early on that these are activities for boys. But for all of these STEM fields, the more that girls believed in these stereotypes favoring boys, the less motivated they were in STEM in terms of their interest, their confidence, and their sense of belonging. So that's why we think it's so important to counter these stereotypes as early as possible before they start to take root in kids' minds. Something else that I think is particularly useful to know is that we found that these stereotypes about interest were the strongest predictor of girls' lower motivation, even more than their stereotypes about ability. And students were even more likely to believe in the interest stereotypes compared to the ability stereotypes. So it's especially important to think about the ways that we send this message to girls that we expect them to not be interested in STEM through the birthday presents we buy them, the summer camps we sign them up for, the STEM characters in the books they read, and whether they get clothes with pictures of STEM things on them. So building their confidence is definitely important, but it's also really important that they think that STEM is fun and enjoyable for girls. And a lot of times, the biggest influence on whether you want to do something is whether you think that you'll like it and enjoy it, not necessarily whether you think you're going to be good at it. I think we all know lots of girls who are good at science and math who say things like, I can, but I don't want to. So kids' beliefs about interests and whether they might want to do STEM things, that might be the most critical for the choices that they make, and maybe not as much their beliefs about their ability and whether they can do it. And also these stereotypes that boys are more interested in STEM, they can feed into girls' beliefs that they don't belong in fields like computer science and engineering. And sense of belonging can play a really large role in our motivation, especially for young women in STEM who might see lots of cues that they don't belong there. And these cues can be even worse for young women of color in STEM. When you feel like you don't fit in with the people or the environment around you, you're much less motivated to engage in that situation. So when I talk about this research, I often get this question, well, what if these stereotypes are true? And so there are a few points I want to make. So first, a lot of these gender differences in STEM interests haven't shown up yet for young children. The gender gaps in STEM start to show up in late elementary school or middle school. But even more importantly, we should never let these stereotypes limit the opportunities that we give to children. And so when we make assumptions about what we think they'll like or not like, we may unintentionally perpetuate these stereotypes. So we can't let these stereotypes limit what our children get to experience or what they believe they're capable of. And then finally, even if the stereotypes might be true on average for adults or for older groups of kids, they can be really harmful when we apply them to individuals and when we apply them to children because they reinforce that dangerous single story. So the big message I want you to take away today is that we as parents can help to stop these self-fulfilling prophecies. So instead of letting our kids believe that girls don't like STEM, we can show them lots of examples of girls who enjoy STEM activities and love STEM classes. And instead of letting them skip STEM activities, we can encourage them to try lots of different kinds of STEM activities. And so if we all work on that, we can have daughters who are more likely to do these STEM activities, and we can work to break these stereotypes. So now I want to tell you a little bit about one of our most recent studies where we also were able to help break this cycle. So we decided to counter these stereotypes by showing videos with testimonials from real girls. So we started by interviewing more than 20 girls on camera, and we just asked them questions about their experiences in computer science classes and in programs like Girls Who Code. And then we edited those interviews to create different videos. So in our interest video, the video really highlighted what they enjoyed about computer science and what they found interesting about it. And we also made an ability video that highlighted their success in computer science and how they realized they were capable of it. Then we also had a third comparison group where the kids didn't watch either video. I'm going to show you a little bit of this interest video to give you a sense of it. And we purposely made this video in portrait mode instead of landscape to try to feel more like an Instagram or a TikTok video, like kids are used to seeing online. So she's saying, I feel like the most interesting part is the coding and like designing your own app to like your liking. I just like the whole thing. I think it fascinates me. You can be really creative with what you make. You can create your own sprite and you can make it move or make any actions you want. Computer science is really fun and there's no limit to what you can create. All right, so that's just a little bit of it. And if you would like to hear the girls in their own voices, here's the QR code to the actual video. So mainly this interest video had students saying things like computer science is really fun and I just love learning about it. I like computer science and I think it's a really fun class and I think that a lot of people would like it. And here's the QR code for the video we made about ability as well. And so for this ability video, we included quotes from most of the same girls, but this time it was their statements like, I can understand it pretty well. It's not hard at all. I have a good grade and the work is really easy. And I think I'm really good at intro to computer science. And so the participants in our research project were about 260 students in sixth grade at a public middle school in Illinois, and they got randomly assigned to see one of our videos or neither video. And coding was one of 10 elective options that was available to students at this school, and they chose their elective courses for seventh grade just a few days after they participated in our project. And so we found that both of the videos made girls significantly more interested in taking their coding class, but there was no effect for boys. And among the students who didn't see one of our videos, there was a big gender gap in interest in the coding class, with boys more interested in that coding class compared to girls. But that gap disappeared for the students who'd seen our brief 2-minute video. Also, the girls who watched one of the videos were more likely to feel like they would belong in that class compared to the girls who didn't watch a video. So when we think about whether gender differences are innate or shaped by experiences, our research really shows that girls' interests can be shaped by the information that we give them. And then that motivation translated into real choices. So the girls who saw one of our videos were 3 times as likely to pick coding as their first choice for their elective. 20% of them picked it compared to a measly 6% in our comparison group. But it didn't matter for boys. And then when we looked at who actually ended up enrolled in that class this year, the girls who'd watched one of our videos were twice as likely to actually be in the class, with 30% of them taking it compared to only 15% in our comparison group. And again, there was no difference for boys. They didn't need to hear this message. And we know elective classes in the real world, they depend on a lot of different factors that we couldn't control in our study, things like scheduling, conflicts with honors classes, or parents' input. But we think this is a really meaningful outcome. And so we think the implications of this study are that we need to enlist a lot more girls to act as ambassadors for these classes and these programs, to go talk to younger girls about their positive experiences in coding classes and about how much they enjoy coding. And as a parent, if you want to get your daughter to sign up for these classes, go find some other older girls who've already taken these classes who can talk to her about their positive experiences. So I hope this evidence has convinced you that parents and teachers need to be paying a lot more attention to these STEM stereotypes and then finding ways that we can reduce the impact of these stereotypes. So maybe one obvious way to change things is to try to get rid of the stereotypes themselves. But stereotypes are notoriously difficult to change because we know they're built up over many years and experiences and cues from parents and teachers and peers and the media and marketing and toys. And so we're not going to be able to change stereotypes in one sitting. So I want us to talk about some other ways that parents can help to break this cycle and get all kids, especially girls, more interested in STEM. And so, first is to challenge stereotypes with all children. So, when you hear children or adults repeating stereotypes, just ask them more follow-up questions. So, do you think that's fair? Why can't girls be scientists? So you're going to offer counterexamples from your own experience and point out some of these similarities between girls and boys. And this is actually a great way to talk to kids about stereotypes by focusing on fairness. Is it fair to judge each person because of their group? Is it fair to treat people differently because of their gender? Because kids usually have very strong opinions that things should be fair. And then, just keep asking why questions, turn it around on our kids, and now we get to ask them why. So find opportunities to challenge the assumptions that kids make about gender and talk to them about why some people might believe that things are only for one gender. Um, and so ask why girls can't do this or why boys can't like that. And then another way we could start to counter these stereotypes about STEM is to give all children early positive experience during preschool and elementary school with activities like coding and robotics. Because if girls never get to experience these for themselves, all they have to go on are their stereotypes. And if children never get to look around a classroom and see lots of girls having fun with coding and robotics, then their stereotypes will never change either. So we did a research project on this in 2017, where we found that just a really short experience of getting to program these really cute animal robots, it made 6-year-old girls more interested in robotics and increased their self-efficacy for programming. And we've also seen in our data that these kinds of experiences can transform kids' stereotypes. So in one of our big survey studies, we found that for the fifth grade students, all the kids were saying that girls were more interested in coding than boys were. And this was really surprising to us because it didn't fit with any of the other data that we'd been collecting. So we went to their teachers to see if we could figure out why this group was so different. And they said that that year they just happened to have a really strong group of fifth grade girls. And those girls were just killing it in their coding class. And so those girls were not only changing their own stereotypes about computer science, but they were shaping the stereotypes of all the boys around them too. And another way to think about these early experiences and why they're so important is by thinking about how they shape children's development. So, first, getting these kinds of experiences early on can help shape kids' brains for later STEM learning. And we can kind of think about it as like brain architecture, because our brains are built a lot like a house from the bottom up in a really active process. So, the skills and the concepts that get developed in the earliest years and stages of life, they establish that architecture and foundation and wiring that supports later learning. So then children's developing brains get wired over time through the experiences that they have. And these simple skills that they develop in early childhood can, form these more complex circuits and skills as children get older and keep exploring. And also, these experiences are kind of like lighting a match that can activate their motivation for STEM. So, these STEM learning experiences that kids can have in the afternoons, in the summer, or on weekends, they can really activate interest in STEM topics by letting kids experiment with STEM in hands on ways and real world ways. So, when kids do STEM activities with you or they participate in these great after school STEM programs, they get more of those hands on experiences and they get to just freely explore. So this can spark their curiosity and let them build up their knowledge over time. And this can help them do better in math and science in school, and maybe even help them be more likely to pursue these STEM careers later. And also, these experiences build fluency. So just like we need to be immersed in real world situations to learn a language and be fluent in a language, children need to explore STEM concepts and use them to fully understand and be fluent in these subjects. So just like when people speak a new language more fluently when they learn it over time and then they go out and they use it, children learn science and STEM concepts best when they encounter these ideas multiple times and they're becoming more fluent in science and STEM. So sign your kids up for these opportunities, for their summer camps, after school programs, and also make it social. So if you have a daughter, get your daughter to sign up with a friend so that she has more fun. And in a lot of these computer science clubs, they can do pair programming. They can find lots of opportunities to collaborate and work with other kids. And when we feel connected, when we feel like we belong, and we feel like we share these goals with other people, we have more fun and become more interested and engaged over time. And another great way to motivate kids in STEM is to show them how they can use STEM to help others. And this can be particularly motivating for girls, but it's really helpful for all kids. So, for example, this is high school student Nicia Warren, and she won the Congressional App Challenge in New York by creating an app that connected residents with local food drives and food banks, both to donate resources and to find resources. And there are so many ways that young people are using STEM to make our world a better place. And, technology and artificial intelligence have gotten to the point where even kids and teenagers can create meaningful things that really make a difference. And also, we can help to change stereotypes about who belongs and likes to do STEM by showing kids role models, like other girls having fun with coding. And we can also show them relatable role models, especially ones that are similar to kids or who've overcome obstacles successfully. And I want to make the point that effective role models for girls don't have to be women. So Dr. Colleen Lewis is a computer science professor, and she once told me this story about how she was teaching middle school kids coding. And, every week she would share computer science role models with them. And the girl's favorite role model, the one that got them most excited about coding, was this guy. He was an animator for Kung Fu Panda at DreamWorks Animation. And this just seemed like such a cool and interesting job to them. So we just need to use these role models to tell more stories about who does STEM so we can move away from that dangerous single story that STEM is only for one kind of person. And also teach growth mindsets to kids. And I don't just say this because I worked with Carol Dweck, because many people believe that you have to be brilliant to succeed in STEM. And so the fear of making mistakes can especially make girls feel intimidated or not confident in STEM. But you actually don't have to be brilliant to be good at STEM. You need effort and the right strategies and teachers who can help you. So we want all kids to have a growth mindset for STEM and to realize that they can also get better at STEM if they have effort and help and the right strategies. And it's okay to not be perfect and to make mistakes. That's how we learn. It's not a sign that you don't belong there. And you can help to model this mindset for them when you make mistakes. And instead of praising them for their ability, we tell them that we value their effort. We value it when they take on challenges, and we value it when they stretch outside their comfort. And another way we can break the cycle is to pay attention to the stereotypes that are communicated in kids' environments. So, for example, when it comes to classrooms, we can help to change computer science and engineering environments so they send a more welcoming message to young women and promote their sense of belonging. So, we did a couple of studies with high school students where we found that high school girls were more interested in a computer science class and felt more like they belonged there when the classroom looked like a welcoming space, like this picture on the right that had things like plants and art and nature posters, compared to the picture on the left that sort of fit these stereotypes. And so making these spaces feel welcoming means paying a lot of attention to things like inclusion. And both girls and boys have told us that they would rather take a STEM class that was half girls and half boys instead of a class that was only for their gender. So we want these places and these spaces where they do these activities to feel welcoming for everyone, no matter who you are. And then the next thing I want you to keep in mind is that we just have to think before we speak, because the way that we talk about women and girls can affect the way that girls view themselves. And this is an example I really like to share because saying something like girls are just as good as boys at math can actually make kids think that the opposite is true because it sets up boys as superior and it makes kids wonder why you felt like you had to say that in the first place. And it matters how we talk about gender differences. Do we make them seem like they're innate and inherent, or do we make it clear to kids that gender differences are shaped by the environment and changeable? So when we help them recognize some of the unfair systems that shape inequality in our society, we can help to reduce some of these barriers. And then finally, if we want to send positive messages about girls' interest in STEM fields like computer science and engineering, one way that we can do that is to emphasize how more and more girls are becoming interested in STEM in recent years. So even though girls are still underrepresented in these classes, the sheer numbers of girls who are taking AP computer science has skyrocketed. So we can focus on positive messages like these to help girls recognize that interests can change and stereotypes don't have to be set in stone. I want to share just a few of my favorite resources here in case you're interested. I love the National Girls Collaborative Project. They have lots of great webinars and newsletters if you want to learn more. And if you have a daughter, look into getting her to participate in Girls Who Code or Black Girls Code. And there's also a great British organization called Let Toys Be Toys that's been working to make toy marketing more gender neutral. And of course, there are many great books and toys out there that can help to counter these stereotypes as well. So to summarize the take-home point, STEM is everywhere and it's for everyone. There are so many different ways every day that kids can learn different STEM skills that can spark their interests. Even in like just a community garden, kids can make scientific observations about how the environment affects certain plants. They can learn how to use technology tools, whether it's, choosing between a shovel or a hoe, or as advanced as setting up sensors so they can track water levels. They can think like engineers, they can build plots and systems for their plots and different structures, and they can practice their math skills by calculating rainfall or predicting the day that the fruit is going to ripen. So, because these learning environments are flexible and they let kids explore their interests, these out of school STEM learning opportunities that parents provide are really good for a wide range of kids and not just those who already think of themselves as math and science kids. And so to finish wrapping this up, thinking back to what we said earlier about Chimamanda Adichie's idea of that dangerous single story, this that STEM is only for boys can reinforce girls' sense that they don't belong and won't enjoy STEM activities. But we can help to rewrite this story for girls and show them a broader image of who enjoys STEM and hopefully make them more willing to give computer science and engineering a chance and to help all children see that STEM is for everyone. So thank you so much for having me here today. There's some information here if you're interested in looking at my lab's website and learning more about our research and other resources. I think Charlene is ready to help us with your questions, and I look forward to those.